Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Chats with Emily's. We are calling our readings through all of the poems of Emily Dickinson contained within the Johnson edition. We turned out to poem number 61, Papa Above. We're back to the question of theodicy, why must there be pain and suffering in the world? And we're back to the religious theological questions that Emily seemed to grapple with all of her life. We're even going to consider her at times very Promethean in the way in which she will challenge deity. Now, our assumption, so that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side is our playlist. And I'm hopeful that you already had some exposure to our introductory set of comments. I mentioned the last of our big five, Theodicy. This will certainly be one of the many poems where Emily will try to come to terms with the question of evil, suffering, pain in the world. And I'm hopeful that you've already worked with the previous 60 poems we just finished with, like her The Saints Retirement. The background information here that we can give to you is, first of all, is Emily playing or is she not playing? That's always going to be one of the questions. We talked about her nature riddle in the previous poem, and now we're talking here about this tone that she has, where she'll call, for example, God, Papa above. So it's going to be interesting. And as we've already said in earlier lectures, Emily had a very interesting relationship with her own father, her own Papa, with those who were religious exhorters, preachers, evangelists of her day, and of course her relationship with the quote-unquote Heavenly Father, God. All of that's going to factor in the reading and study of this poem. Now, this is in some ways a prayer poem. We're going to have several of these prayer poems that we're familiar with, and we'll take a look at them after we finish reading. Papa Above. Regard a mouse, or powered by the cat. Reserve within thy kingdom a mansion for the rat. Snug in sapphiric cupboards to nibble all the day, while unsuspecting cycles wheel solemnly away. Now, the only time in all of her poetry that the word Papa gets used is right here. I find that fascinating, but even more fascinating, this is how she addresses God in what appears to be a type of prayer. Now, we're going to see some of this later on in poem 376. Of course I prayed, and did God care? He cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, give me my reason, life. I had not had, but for yourself. 'Twere better charity to leave me in the Adam's tomb, merry and naught and gay and numb, than this smart misery. When we meet poem 502, we'll hear this. At least to pray is left, O Jesus in the air. I know not which thy chamber is, I'm knocking everywhere. Thou settest earthquake in the south and maelstrom in the sea. Say, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, hast thou no arm for me? So you can, this kind of like prayer, non-prayer in some ways, you might think of it that way, will come to mind. And I think in some ways Emily channels, for example, a psalm like Psalm 13, how long wilt thou forget me, O Lord, forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? In other words, calling to God, but often are we going to call this playful? Are we going to call this ironic? By the way, when we hit poems 1601 and poems 1751, we'll play similar kind of games with Emily and her prayer motif. Notice it's Papa Above. Look at all these exclamation points. Regard a mouse. Now, we're going to be mouse and rat. In other words, the way her word picture is remarkable here. She says, basically, I feel like a mouse or a rat that a cat is playing with, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. This is, again, the theodicy question. What do you do when you come to realize there is pain and suffering in the world from which I cannot extricate myself? I can pray to Papa Above, and I can say, regard a mouse, or powered by the cat. Reserve within thy kingdom a mansion for the rat. Now, readers today maybe don't immediately make the point that, first of all, mansion is capitalized. Second of all, it is got quotation marks around it. And so what exactly is it she's doing? Well, she's making a reference to the Gospel of St. John 14, 2 through 6. In my Father's house are many mansions. That's the point of this. In other words, would you please hold me, the mouse, the rat, would you please hold me a place in heaven so that I can escape all the craziness, all the dangers, all the suffering of life? Notice this use of the word snug in Sephiric cupboards. Now, we saw Sephiric for the first time in poem 24. We'll see it again in 1465 and 1518. This idea that I want to live where the angels live because they don't have to worry about cats. They don't have to worry about being attacked. They can be safe. And snug in Sephiric cupboards to nibble all the day. In other words, just give me a little hole, a little mouse hole where I can escape, and somewhere in heaven I can eat what my Emily group called heavenly cheese. I love that. Thank you, Emily group, for that one. And it's wonderful. It makes you smile. You can't help but smile to imagine. Let me just go nibble on my heavenly cheese. Of course, the Greeks would call it ambrosia. While unsuspecting cycles, notice capitalized, wheel solemnly away. In other words, as the years go by, if I could just find a way to escape, to get in my little mansion somewhere, okay, my little cupboard somewhere and hide away. Now, of course, there's an obvious irony here, because that's exactly what Emily did. In some ways, we are reading her productions from her cupboard, yes, from her mansion. And so in some ways, this poem is almost like a mirror that tells us exactly how she saw the work of her letter to the world, as she'll call it here in a few poems later. At 2a then, well, I think the argument here is that humans can only beg God for some comfort from the cycles of pain and suffering that are inevitable. It's always the longing to escape the pain and suffering that one will never fully be able to extricate oneself from. At 2b, well, I love the question of the tone of this poem. Is it playful? Is it more like ironic, nasty, sarcastic? Is she being reverential in her use of pop above, or is it something other? I'll leave it to you. At 3a, there's so many places we could go, but of course you have to think about Shakespeare's King Lear. You'll remember in 4:1 Gloucester's famous Linus flies, "To wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport." And you'll remember, we gave full lectures on this at learnstrong.net, you'll remember that in that moment, that everything that's playing out on stage clearly suggests the Theodicy question is answered by God does not seem to care at all. Although, of course, Shakespeare kind of balances the scales a little bit by the end of the play, but still, Cordelia is dead, and of course Lear is dead. It's kind of tragic. I also would challenge you to think about the Burns's little classic To a Mouse. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net where he will apologize to the mouse for tearing up his house. The best laid plans of mice and men soon off to go awry, to transliterate it. Finally, at 3b, how do you read this poem? I mean, how do you own it? How do you read it? Do you see this poem as playful? Do you see this poem as more sarcastic, tongue-in-cheek? How do you see it? And to what degree do you reconcile the pain and suffering in the world? And to what degree would you like to just try to escape it for a while? Some of you are saying, I escape it through what? Studying Emily's amazing poetry. Thank you.